Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain. In a desperate attempt to isolate Pakistan, the Modi administration pulled out of the SARC conference. That was happening and taking place within Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. Many foreign and domestic analysts are of the opinion that the Modi's administration's move to pull out of SARC caused more damage to India itself than Pakistan. To discuss the topic of India's desperation to isolate Pakistan, we have with us today Andrew Korybko, a Russian analyst who writes for Katahan, a global geopolitical think tank. His recent article on SARC you can see on your screens right now. And also joining us, Shahid Raza, a geopolitical analyst for an Islamabad-based think tank, Command 11. He also writes for Katahan, an international geopolitical think tank. His article is also on SARC. You can see on your screens right now. Welcome to our show, Andrew Korybko. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
Hi, thank you for inviting me back again. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Shahid Raza, for joining us on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you, Zain, for having me. It was also a great pleasure to join the show with Andrew.
Let's get to the first question, and Andrew, I'll start with you. What does the death of SARC mean, and how did it happen, in your opinion?
Okay, well, the first thing is we need to see how it happened. If we trace the genesis, we see that India wanted to politicize the organization by trying to blame Pakistan for what it terms as terrorism, even though they were just militant attacks. Now, all that is very controversial in and of itself, but what India wanted to do is India tried to assemble a regional coalition using this narrative, and they tried saying that Pakistan is supporting terrorism and all of this, and either you're with us or you're against us. That's what he said to the SARC members. Now, he did this with the intention of wanting to isolate, as Modi thought, to isolate Pakistan out of South Asia. That was the intention, was to kind of deprive Pakistan of this regional platform, which is always beneficial if you're going to talk about cooperation, areas of shared interest, such as infrastructure, economic deals, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a very, very sneaky move, but it wasn't done just because Modi felt crazy or anything like that. It was premeditated as part of this hybrid war on Pakistan, and also because he intended to replace Pakistan with Myanmar and Thailand by replacing SARC with BIMSTEC. Now, what does this all mean by the fact that it happened? Well, it's not all bad for Pakistan. That's the thing is, some observers thought initially that this might have been pretty bad, and that's what India intended for it to be. But my friend Shahid, he wrote an excellent article about how this is actually kind of a blessing. It helps Pakistan and it helps China by deepening their partnership, by making one and the other even closer out of the shared interest. And by the very fact that India displayed its hostility, I mean, this showed to the rest of the world that India is not this, fun-loving, smiling, country that's shining and rising from its knees. I mean, this is a country that has turned very hostile under the Modi government, and it pulls out. It doesn't pull back from aggression. I mean, it's not doing it in the conventional sense. It's not invading Pakistan. It is supporting terrorism in Pakistan, and it's trying to support separatism, but it's also trying to institutionally destabilize it and dislodge it from South Asia. Now, this is never going to happen. This is just a pipe dream of Modi, but that's the whole point behind it, is it reveals Indian aggression. It shows that India is using asymmetrical measures to destabilize Pakistan and try to isolate it in its neighborhood. That's the Indian intention, but it's not going to succeed because all that it did is it showed the public in South Asia that this was uncalled for. There was no reason to politicize SARC. There was no reason to bring the bilateral dispute between Pakistan and India into a multilateral organization. I mean, why does India want Pakistan out of SARC? Is it afraid that Pakistan's creating even closer partnerships with India's neighbors? Is it afraid of Pakistan and Nepal, for example, getting closer using the shared SARC platform? I'm not sure, but it definitely shows that India is very insecure by having Pakistan in any organization that India is a part of, and that India wants to dominate organizations. It wants to use them as platforms for projecting its own power. And it's not doing this because it has anyone's interest at heart. It's not doing it for anyone's own good, so to speak. It's doing this out of its own subjective interest of attacking Pakistan in order to indirectly try to sideline China. We need to see it through that prism. When we see it through that prism, we understand that Indian intentions are laid bare, but they unwittingly actually turned out to be an advantage because of what's happening with Pakistan and China. All it did was solidify the all-weather strategic partnership. It backfired.
Andrew, what are the dynamics of Greater South Asia in geostrategic terms?
Okay, well, this is a really good question to ask because, I had a mention in my last answer that India wants to replace Pakistan with Myanmar and Thailand. And this is an evolution of India's Act East strategy. I mean, originally it was called Look East, then Modi upgraded it to Act East. Now what India is trying to do is trying to institutionally link itself to these two countries as a way, it's kind of like it's a shortcut for eventually creating an Indian-ASEAN partnership, the Southeast Asian nations. It's doing this for two reasons. First of all, it has self-interested benefits in trying to economically and strategically connect itself to these countries by means of the mainland nations closest to India, Myanmar and Thailand. These two countries aren't incidental. India is also spearheading something called the Trilateral Highway to connect the northeast of India with Myanmar to Thailand, with the possibility of even going over route through India, through Indochina, to Vietnam, and all the way down to Singapore. By itself, nothing wrong with it. However, India is not looking at this through a win-win partnership way. It sees it as another form of zero-sum game. Now, why I say this is we can't forget the fact that, this is China's backyard. Southeast Asia, China is dominant here economically and strategically. And China's main project is something called, what I've called, the ASEAN Silk Road. And this is basically a high-speed railroad going from the Yunnan capital of Kunming all the way down to Singapore. Now, these two projects, the ASEAN Silk Road and the Trilateral Highway and its expansion, they could peacefully coexist and actually help one another. But the problem is that India is trying to use these economic infrastructure projects as ways to further embed a strategic military political influence in ASEAN with the hopes of kind of trying to claw the region away from China. This is kind of the way that Modi is seeing it. And that's bad because it creates strategic tension and friction with China. So this is how India is looking. India is looking to the east, but it's also looking to the west. Now, let me get to the west in a second, because I'm going to tell you what Pakistan is doing in response to the death of SARC. And you'll see a clear overlap between India, Pakistan, and also China. So in response to the death of SARC, with India moving eastwards for the most part, Pakistan has declared that it wants to look westward. It wants to look towards Iran, the broader Middle East, and the former Soviet republics of Central Asia. It wants to look that way. And if we look at what all these countries have in common, it's a shared Islamic heritage. Now, why does Pakistan want to look there? Well, particularly because of these civilizational similarities and the fact that Pakistan, in my personal view, is the strongest Muslim country. Now, I say this, first of all, by virtue of the population, almost 200 million people. Secondly, the fact, it's obvious. You guys are the only Muslim country with nuclear weapons. Third, you guys have one of the not only do you have one of the strongest conventional militaries, but I do believe that in the world you have one of the strongest militaries that is capable of combating asymmetrical threats. You look at what General Rahil Sharif has done. It's amazing what he has done to combat insurgency, Indian-supported terrorism in Balochistan and in the federally administered tribal areas, FATA. We look at that and we see, wow, Pakistan is very, very strong. Also because of economic reasons as well. Many people don't emphasize the Pakistani economy, but in the future, you guys are definitely going to be growing even faster than you are today by virtue of CPEC and by the very fact that if Muslim countries want to get closer with China, they got to go through Pakistan. They have to be very friendly with Pakistan because of CPEC, because of how important CPEC is, which I spoke about in our last video. So what Pakistan wants to do now, Pakistan wants to use CPEC to get closer with the Central Asian countries because CPEC will go through Pakistan to China, to Xinjiang, and from Xinjiang, it'll move over and just relate to Iran. Well, Iran said they want to cooperate with CPEC, and I know that in the past, Iran and Pakistan, they didn't always see eye to eye. I understand that, but now they will, definitely, because it is in Iran's best interest to have very good neighborly relations with Pakistan because, the key, how do I say this? The way to get to China is through Pakistan for all Muslim countries because of how important CPEC is. So any type of bilateral problems that Iran and Pakistan had, those need to be put in the past because of the fact that China now is working so closely with Pakistan through the strategic all-weather partnership. Now, this is where things kind of get confusing now because I said that India also wants to look westward. India is doing this through its north-south corridor, which is going to have its terminal port at Chabahar. But the thing is it's not really going anywhere. I mean, if we compare Chabahar, North-South Corridor, with Gwadar and CPEC, it's embarrassing. It is totally embarrassing. I mean, India talks about development, infrastructure, shining India, so on and so forth. What are they doing with Chabahar? Most people can't tell you because they're not really doing anything. Doing a lot of talk, but not walking the walk. Look at Gwadar. Gwadar is poised to become a Dubai of South Asia, a Dubai in the Arabian Sea. What is Chabahar? It's not really doing much. But see, Modi made a lot of promises. He talked big. He loves talking. It's his Gujarat style from when he was leading the state. So he made a lot of promises to Iran and a lot of promises to Russia that this North-South corridor is going to be created. Russia is planning to coordinate its own infrastructure project inside of Russia to adapt to this project and make it so that basically India's gateway to Europe will go through Iran, Azerbaijan, and Russia. If this project fails, the Russian-Indian partnership is going to be in a lot of trouble. It's going to be in a lot of trouble. India will still invest in Russia, still needs the resources, still wants the political partnership, but there'd be a lot of lost trust. Therefore, even though Chabahar is a late starter, it eventually will grow. And why this is important is because India wants to use Chabahar and the North-South corridor not just to go closer to Russia, Iran, Azerbaijan, and eventually thenceforth to Europe. It wants to have a tangent. It wants to have a spoke of it that goes off the rails north into the Central Asian republics. Basically, India wants to, the way Modi sees it and Ajit Doval, they want to compete with China in Central Asia. They hope that Indian goods will be able to displace China's. What they're trying to do is trying to bring the new Cold War to Central Asia using these asymmetrical means of economic competition. It's very, very dangerous because, like I said, with Pakistan looking towards Central Asia and China looking there and Russia looking there, you have India coming in and trying to displace, not complement, but displace. The same logic, if you want to call it logic, that India is attempting to use with Southeast Asia, it wants to use in Central Asia. No win-win partnership, but zero-sum game. Now, what is very interesting about this is, as we all know, with economic influence, naturally comes political influence. And the next step is typically military. So what do we see here? Well, we see basically what India wants to do to Central Asia is what it did with Afghanistan. It started with economic influence, strategic influence, talking about diversification. India likes to talk about diversification. This is the euphemism they use to kind of hide their strategic advancements, their zero-sum strategic advancements in countries that are also of interest to multipolar states, such as China and Pakistan in this case. And they want to use this economic diversification, as they're going to try to cover it up as, to eventually inject Indian political influence into these areas, and eventually they want to have military partnerships. India wants to sell the made in India military goods to the Central Asian countries, and they're just really trying to have Indian advisors there, basically disrupt the whole thing. So these are the geostrategic contours of what's happening with a grid. If you look at a map, look all the way north from Kazakhstan, sweep all the way south to Iran, go across the Indian Ocean into Southeast Asia, particularly the mainland portion of Indochina and Indonesia. And if you combine former Soviet Central Asia, Iran, and ASEAN, you have Greater South Asia right there.
Andrew Korybko, how do you see the future of Central and South Asia post-SARC?
Yes, this is great, that you want me to elaborate more on what I had mentioned, because I see it as being destabilized. I see it as being destabilized, maybe not right away, maybe not anything too dramatic, but we can't discount the fact that, like I said, I mean, India has very negative intentions with what it wants to do. If it just had peaceful intentions of trade, bartering, having regular partnerships, I mean, there's no problem with that. But we see how they're teaming up with the United States, with the Military Strategic Partnership, LOMOA. We see how they're just so aggressive with the hybrid war on CPEC. We see how they institutionally displaced Pakistan in SARC and replaced Pakistan with Myanmar and Thailand. So we look at Indian intentions, we see that they're very disruptive for the emerging multipolar world order. And by the very fact that we see that Greater South Asia now is going to include Central Asia and Southeast Asia, India is trying to take the lead in expanding its influence there. We see India's track record. I mean, we see its track record of disruption and destabilization against Pakistan as a proxy for destabilizing China. We already see that there are existing border conflicts with India and China, that India is definitely trying to exacerbate and aggravate in the past couple months, past year more generally. And we see that, look, they're going to try to do something like that in Southeast Asia. What they're going to try to do, they're going to try to compete with Chinese investments in Myanmar and in Thailand, because Thailand it's kind of the crossroads for all these infrastructure projects that are being built in Southeast Asia. And it could be very peaceful. It could be the road, all roads might go through Thailand, literally and figuratively in Southeast Asia. Or India might really try to gain some sway in these countries and kind of try to lure them away from China. It would not be these countries' benefits, but is it to the benefit of Bangladesh to side with India against Pakistan and SAARC? It's not. It's not. It also creates an uncomfortable position between Bangladesh and China. I'm sure behind closed doors, Chinese were not very happy with what the Bangladeshis were doing. Now we move over to Central Asia, and we see that's going to be later in coming. I mean, like I said, Chabahar is an embarrassment. Chabahar, it's not developing like it was supposed to. Modi made these big promises to Putin, made big promises to the Ayatollah. He's just not able to fulfill them along the time frame that he promised. Now, like I said, it'll be a late bloomer. Better late than never, as they're going to say. So basically, in the future, look at Southeast Asia with India moving in there, trying to disrupt and displace China and Chinese influence, Chinese goods, Chinese investment, and so on and so forth, using its economic inroads as a first step towards political inroads, military inroads, strategic inroads. This will all be done to complement the United States pivot to Asia. Secondly, it'll take more time, but that is also the plan for Central Asia, is to do that because it wants to compete with Pakistan as the most influential and important Muslim country. And I mean that in a robust way. I mean that, like I said, in terms of population, economic potential, military, both conventional and asymmetrical, and the fact that, the path to China runs to Pakistan. Path to China runs through CPEC. That's how Muslim countries are going to be made to see things, because of the strategic all-weather partnership between Islamabad and Beijing. But that's another reason why there's the hybrid war on CPEC. So it'll be late in coming, but India wants to displace China in Central Asia and wants to create a position where China becomes so strategically dependent on its Central Asian investments, both in infrastructure, economic, New Silk Road, pipelines, that India is going to kind of going to try to come in and shake things up with that. So just to recap, keep your eyes on Southeast Asia, and then afterwards look at Central Asia, with India leading from behind on the U.S. behalf. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not like we're going to snap our fingers and see it happen. These are the long-term trends that we have identified. They are based on objective empirical observations that I have outlined with India's intentions and Modi's track record, and that's what we can see.
Shahid, moving on to you, how did China gain from Indian sabotage of SAARC summit in Islamabad?
China, in my opinion, has immensely gained from the Indian sabotage of SAARC in a number of different ways. The first victory for China over India is that India has successfully shot itself in the foot by adopting an almost childish protectionism of its perceived interests in SAARC region, which reflects really negatively on India. Second dimension here is the economics. The Chinese are not only very aggressively investing money in countries which India considers to be its allies. For instance, the recent visits to Dhaka by President Xi Jinping, which paved the way for a massive $24 billion investment for Bangladesh, which is basically an infrastructure and economic investment, similar lines as the CPEC. China is also making overtures to all member states of SAARC under bilateral mechanisms. The third dimension here is the military balance in the region. China has recently approved the sale of 8 oil-engaged submarines to Pakistan, which brings Pakistan's number of submarines on the equal numbers to India. Not just that, China is also marketing its most latest technologies like 4th generation main battle tanks and 5th generation fighter jets to Pakistan. It is also selling military equipment to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and also providing military assistance to Afghanistan, which is another country India calls its quote-unquote strategic ally. So in simple terms, Beijing has gained the most out of the Indian murder of SAARC on a number of different fronts.
Okay, Shahid, but what are the interests of China in South Central Asia versus India?
The Chinese interests in Central and South Asian region are not only economic, but also strategic. The One Belt, One Road project is a historic opportunity for Central Asian republics to connect with the Pakistani forces. By the way, that's something that they have always wanted to do. And as well as to the Chinese markets, because, as you know, the Chinese market is the second largest market in the world at the moment, and it is going to become the largest economy in the world in just a few years. So the Chinese believe that the economic growth in the region is going to become a vital element for bringing peace and stability in its restive Xinjiang region, where an Indian raw-backed insurgency is active at the moment. So on the other hand, the Indian objectives in the same region are driven by an almost mythological quest for hegemony, which is quite evident from Indian sabotage of SAARC summit in Islamabad. India has proven that it can go to any limit of strategic stupidity to try and cling on to the sands of time, which are so swiftly turning in the favor of China-Pakistan camp in this region. So lastly but not least, Afghanistan is considered to be a quote-unquote proxy ground for India, as it sees the war-ravaged country as a perfect location to wage its hybrid war against Pakistan in general and the China-Pakistan economic corridor in specific. On the other hand, though, China has confided in Afghanistan under the quadrilateral cooperation and coordination mechanism along with Pakistan and Tajikistan to counter terrorism, which is currently being paid for by the Indian deep state.
Okay, Shahid, last question. How do you forecast the future of Central and South Asian region?
Okay, then I predict that projects like CPAC and CAREC is another Central Asian connectivity project which will connect all the Central Asian republics to the ports in Pakistan. They're going to prove to be game-changing opportunities for Central Asian states and as well as Pakistan, because for the first time in history, the Central Asian Republic, which is a landlocked piece of geography, will have access to Pakistani ports for the global trade. And as you know, that the Central Asian republics are rich in minerals and a number of other economic factors. So it is going to be a very, very big opportunity for the Central Asian republics. And in my opinion, it will increase regional connectivity and interdependence, which means that we are expected to see a long period of sustained strategic stability in Central Asian and Central Asian region. On the other hand, though, I think South Asia will continue to suffer at the hands of the Indian deep state and its hubris-driven policies towards other countries in South Asia. India cannot pay for any major infrastructure project in the region. It cannot pay for projects that will pave way for South Asian economic growth. But at the same time, it's not allowing China to become part of SAARC and allowing them to pay for those projects. So the fate of South Asian region will remain unstable and uncertain as long as the Indian deep state is involved in the policy making. The South Asian countries would have to make joint efforts to maintain their sovereignty in the face of an aggressively nationalistic government in India. I also think that Pakistan and China are going to form a new economic bloc in Central and South Asian region, which is being called as the Greater South Asian Project, as Andrew Korybko mentioned in his article, and I also mentioned in my article at Get On. So I also think that South Asian countries will continue to engage with China and Pakistan on bilateral terms, which could deny India the space it wants to occupy in the regional power turf. So I think that it basically comes down to how South Asian countries individually play their cards. So in the next few years, these strategies and their outcomes will be more specific and more clear to us. So I think, based on my forecast, the Central Asian region will become very stable in the future. The South Asian region, its stability and its economic growth depends on how they engage with the China-Pakistan axis in the region as compared to India.
Thank you so much, Andrew Korybko, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to be on with Shahid, and I'm also very thankful to the audience for watching. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, Shahid Raza. It was a pleasure having you too on the show.
Thank you, Zain, for having me. It was also a great pleasure to join the show with Andrew.
This was Andrew Korybko and Shahid Raza discussing India's desperation to isolate Pakistan. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.